And so the first person I'd like to call up is Matt from Facebook. So Matt, if you wouldn't mind coming to join us. So, you know, basically, there's nothing bigger than Facebook in the social networking space, I think it's fair to say. At an incredible, explosive rate, these guys have come on the scene and taken over. I think there's one extremely important question that we need to get the answer of, so don't avoid it, okay, this morning. If I hit ignore, what happens?
If you hit ignore, that's a good question. So for people who don't know, when you receive a friend request from somebody, you can accept it or you can ignore it or you can do nothing about it. If you ignore it, it just goes away. The other person is not notified, which is the question that some people may be asking, and you just go on with your day.
Okay.
So it isn't really any different than doing nothing about it. It just clears it out of your queue.
Okay, got it. All right, so Matt, let's start with you. You're sort of Silicon Valley DNA, as far as I can tell. We were chatting earlier. Your first entrepreneurial activity was at the age of 9.
That's true.
So then you were forced kicking and screaming to actually go back to Yale and graduate. So tell us about what you've been doing on the entrepreneurial side prior to joining Facebook.
Well, it's funny. I did sort of start something when I was just a kid, but oddly enough, I haven't done so since.
Okay.
I've joined a few startups at the early stage since then. So when I was at Yale, I left in the middle and went to go work for a company in China that some people here who spent time in China may remember, called Asia Info, which built the backbone IP networks for mainland China in the 1990s, which was an incredibly exciting thing to do. I was really lucky to get the chance to see what was happening in China in the 90s. And I did go back and finish up school, which may have been the biggest mistake, but so be it. Moved out to Silicon Valley, and I joined LinkedIn shortly after the business plan for that was put together before we launched the site. So I was there from the time we launched the site. And about 2 years after that, through the concentric circles, most of which have to do with PayPal right now in the consumer internet world in Silicon Valley, I came over to Facebook through the guy who put the first angel money, the first angel investment into Facebook at the end of 2004. So I was very lucky to be in the right place at the right time more than once over the past couple of years. We'll see how it goes.
So you joined Facebook, there were 3, 4 people?
Yeah, there were 4 or 5 full-time people.
Okay, 4 or 5 people.
Yep.
And how many are you at Facebook today?
We're about 575 employees now.
So I mean, that's just explosive growth. Explain to us sort of the reason that you think Facebook has just taken off so tremendously virally.
Well, on the company side, we'd love to keep the company as small as possible, and that's always a goal. On the user side, of course, we'd like to make Facebook as large as possible, and we're very excited about how that's been going. To answer your question, I think at the core it's because we're helping to solve a need that is very fundamental for people, which is enabling people to communicate and share information and understand the people who matter to them in their real life, their friends, their family, their coworkers, other people who are important to one in one's real life, in a way that's never quite been possible before. And I think people see that when they use the product, and they've really embraced that. And it turns out to be something that is a fairly universal human need, because we're all, we're a social species. We all have people we care about and we want to understand better and share more information with. And so I think that's really been what's driven the growth of the site.
But the roots of Facebook were clearly in the sort of college, the college sort of phenomenon, right? So it became a way of college kids basically communicating with one another, dating one another. Yeah,
there was some dating that went on, but it was never really an explicitly dating site. Yeah. It was always an explicitly communicating site. And it operates very much the way real life operates. In fact, we really view it just as an extension of real life as opposed to an online community or a virtual community. In that, just as in real life, dating and all kinds of other social activities, and I would include things like getting a job in the broad category of a social activity, happen through the relationships that you have in life. And so I think that the core of the product hasn't really changed at all since it was just available for Harvard students. And the same ideas drive the product now that drove it then.
Okay. And then there was this incredible shift that happened, I guess, sometime last year when in a different manner to the other social networks, you guys decided to basically embrace everyone and through opening your API. So can you tell us a bit about sort of the logic behind that and what it's done for Facebook?
Sure. So I'll start with the logic behind it and then talk a little bit about what it's done. We've always had the idea that what we're trying to do is, on the one hand, kind of a very universal human need, but on the other hand, is something that's extremely personal for people because it's about communicating with people that matter to you in your life. And so we always thought about the product and the company really as a technology company more than an editorial or a content company. And rather than trying to make specific decisions for people about how they should use the product, we always focused on building the tools, if you will, that enable people to make their own decisions about what they wanted their privacy settings to be, who they wanted to share information with, what they wanted their experience of the site to be. And when we thought about how we could best extend that and best kind of empower that, it occurred to us that as the user base was continuing to grow, there were all of these needs that people have that can be facilitated through this type of a product that we were never going to be able to build ourselves. And even if we tried, we probably would do 3/4 of them wrong. And so we said, well, rather than trying to solve all of these problems ourselves, why don't we open this environment up and allow the developer community of the world to participate in building applications and services for these people.
Which is different, for instance, from what MySpace had been doing.
Yeah,
right?
no one had really done it
okay.
up until that point.
Okay. And how's it taken off since then?
It's been really explosive. We've been really, really excited about the growth. Close to 100% of users have added at least one third-party application into Facebook, over 90% of users. We have about 20,000 applications that are actually live on the platform today, and the growth in that is continuing to be really phenomenal. We just launched in German and in Germany about 9 weeks ago, and we already have over 2,000 German developers who are starting to build applications on top of the platform, for example.
So these applications, I mean, is it just sort of the cool thing to do for a big company, sort of a public company to say, yes, we're on Facebook, let's build an app? Or what, are they getting value out of this thing?
Well, I think just like in any type of environment that has these dynamics, there's a head and there's a tail. And there's all kinds of different reasons that people are participating in the ecosystem and are building applications. So we do see large companies at the head, both large application companies, large e-commerce companies like Amazon.com that have built applications and integrated them into Facebook, large brands that have built applications and integrated them into Facebook. We also see an incredible tail of developers, small groups of people or solo, individual developers who are creating applications, some as a business, some as a hobby, some for a personal need they have, and collectively these things are filling out a lot of niches that we wouldn't be able to do ourselves. And there's also some really powerful things that are happening at the head that are enabling vertical functionality that we probably wouldn't have gotten right if we tried to do it ourselves.
So I read somewhere you guys have something like 160 million registered users and 60 plus uniques.
So we don't focus on registered users because we don't think it's very meaningful. We also don't focus on uniques because we don't think it's very meaningful. The ComScore unique numbers for this past month, I think, were 109 million worldwide.
Okay.
We focus on a number that we call active users, which is registered users who have used the product in the last 30 days. So it's essentially the Venn diagram intersection of unique visitors and registered users, if you will. That's the group we think that matters, and we have over 70 million active users.
On a monthly basis?
On a monthly basis, yeah.
And so where does the money come into this? It's a lot of users.
For the most part.
Okay.
Yeah, it is a lot of users. Advertising for the most part.
Yeah, and so the advertising are sponsorships, or they're sort of your own advertising network?
Well, we can talk about it from a product perspective or from a channel perspective. So from a channel perspective, we have 3 channels. We have a self-service channel, we have a partnership with Microsoft, and we have a direct sales channel for large brand advertisers. The products that they're selling, partnership with Microsoft is for standard IAB banner advertising units. That's an important part of the strategy. And the direct sales channel sells more integrated advertising that integrates into the newsfeed and into the site.
So you guys have a sales team?
We do.
And how many folks on the sales team?
We don't break out the numbers.
Okay, got it. I guess you're not public yet, right?
Exactly. It's one of the
rumor has it you're going to buy Yahoo, is that right?
I think NASA is going to buy Facebook, which is then going to buy, yeah. Rumor has lots of things.
Great. Thanks a lot, Matt.
Sure.
I'll call you up a little later for general Q&A. Thanks. Super. Next with us is Ramu Yalamanchi, if you wouldn't mind coming up here. Ramu is the founder and CEO of Hi5, which is another explosive social network out there. So tell us a bit about Hi5.
So Hi5 is one of the largest and fastest growing social networks on the web. Some of our big markets, we're the largest social network for the Spanish-speaking audience, fairly significant in Eastern Europe. Places like Portugal, we're the #1 social network, and countries like Thailand as well in Asia.
Okay. And so if I were going to think of MySpace or Facebook, what's the differentiator here? So, I mean,
from the time that we started Hi5, we really focused on an international audience. We actually launched the service in late 2003, beginning of 2004, and international was our interest, and for a couple of reasons. One, we saw the internet users in the U.S. starting to flatten out. It was single-digit % growth year over year. And second, we looked at the web and we said, wow, what are the different ways that people communicate today? What are ways that we can enhance personal communications? And looking internationally and thinking of new ways to connect people were our primary interest, and that's what drew us to looking abroad.
Got it. And in terms of financing, how did that come about?
Yeah, so we have kind of an interesting story. We started the company with about $250,000. Stayed under the radar for a number of years, got the company profitable back in October of 2004, all on advertising, and all on advertising internationally. And so, you know, it was just this last year that we raised about $35 million in equity and debt.
And what is, so, I mean, it's pretty amazing that you guys were profitable from day one. So what was the necessity of this fundraise? So, other than VCs like me saying, banging on the door saying, you really need our money.
That's right.
And then the value add.
Besides those two reasons, it was really to expand further internationally. I think when we first started the company and for a long time into the company, the way we would invest into the future is we would look and say, here's how much money we made, or here's how much money we're going to make in the next quarter or 2 quarters, and that's basically the horizon for how we can look at the business. And so having capital to look further out and take a longer view on the business was the primary reason that we went out to raise money.
Got it. So you're #1 in Thailand, you're #1 in Portugal. Mexico.
Yeah.
So you've raised this money, so obviously you have a ton of people in those local countries.
We don't actually. So we have about 100 people in the company, and they're all actually based in the US. One of the things that we've been able to do is leverage our users in our community to help us figure out what are the local nuances that make our product attractive in markets.
So this is clearly a phenomenon, right? The fact that Ramu and Hi5 are able to be in 26 countries without one single person in those countries sort of gives you a sense of the strength, the power of the internet, right? So, this actually happened in the Skype phenomenon as well, where all of a sudden we saw that we were growing just at an enormous rate in Denmark, and we had no one in Denmark. I mean, the penetration of Denmark was something like 12% of the actual population. So, of course, the natural thing to do was to set up an office in Denmark, staff it in Copenhagen, have a logo. Actually, it only started declining after that. So, I guess, the question that I have is, when you think of expansion, what are the benefits of having someone local for you? Why wouldn't you just continue to cater to them from abroad, and it sounds like let your users or your power users help you get through those markets?
Yeah, I think the key benefits for a business like ours, there are 2 big things I would think about. One is really from a sales and marketing perspective. So today we have about 6 or more partnerships around the world where we leverage companies like Portugal Telecom, Arbo Media, Sanook in Thailand, and they represent our inventory to the local marketplace. One of the benefits that we could get by actually having local presence is to be doing a better job in supporting them, allowing them to sort of get a consistent message of Hi5 to all the different advertisers. The second is really having a combination of both a user approach to helping us evolve the product and actually having people from Hi5 in the market to make sure that we're getting consistency in things like how we do research.
Okay. But, I mean, jury's out as to whether that's worth it or not.
That's true.
Okay.
We've been able to grow in so many markets. We're the #1 social network in 26 countries, and so and we've done that with just a single office in San Francisco.
So how many, I mean, how many of these social networks can we have, right? You guys are at a massive scale.
Mm-hmm.
Matt was
million.
talking about 44 million. Matt is talking about Facebook numbers, 109 million. So what, you know, how many of these can there be?
It's a good question. I see social networks a little bit like more similar to network television. I think you can support potentially a couple networks or maybe 2 or 3 in a market. And I think if you look across the globe, there's a number of countries that within the top 5 sites, there will be more than one that's actually a social network.
Okay. Now, give us a sense of, you know, is MySpace very similar to High Five, for instance, or is it different? Where are those differences?
I would say in terms of how we look at the world versus how MySpace looks at the world, MySpace seems to take a very media-centric approach, and they seem to say that, you know, here's content that's on MySpace, or here's content from News Corporation, and we're pushing it to our users. We take more of an organic approach where what we facilitate is a way for users to interact, to communicate on the site, to be expressive in very simple ways. But all the content gets generated from the community itself.
So it sounds a lot like dating to me.
A little bit. Well, in terms of the use cases, I would say that the #1 reason people use a service like High Five is to actually stay connected and to see what's happening with their friends. A very simple way of finding out what happened last weekend or what just happened on that trip that you took. And you know, in terms of what people were doing in the past, if we look at a country, for example, like Mexico, recently we were looking at the 15 to 24 demographic, which is a very high-use audience on High Five. And one of the things that we noticed is that, you know, in the last year, High Five grew something like 81%. All of the different mail services were flat or actually fell a little bit. So it seems like High Five is actually being replaced or replacing what people were doing before in things like email.
So what's the end game for you guys? Want to go public? Want to buy Facebook? What's the story?
All the above.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
So no, in terms of just what we're doing with the business, we raised capital this last year to continue with our mission of just getting big in more countries, building the service out further. I believe that social networks will actually become the top sites in every market, and that leads us to becoming, you know, a starting point for what people do day in and day out. Since we're in so many different emerging markets, one of the interesting things that happens as a result of that is that High Five becomes a lasting brand in consumers' minds. So
the girls in the last session were talking about spending 2 hours on Stardoll. 2 hours a day is what it sounded like, which is a hell of a lot of time. Yeah. God. Okay, so how much time are folks spending on High Five on a daily basis?
When they come for a session, it's somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. Is what people spend.
Okay, so they're checking in, checking their.
They're checking in. They're looking at.
So if it is sort of a dating platform or next generation dating, if you will, which actually in the sort of early days of High Five, that's what you guys were coming out of or thinking of building. Why not build a subscription model? Why advertising?
So the initial business that we did was actually, before we evolved into High Five, we looked at Match.com. I think this was in 2003, and had built a service that was a competitor to Match. And we learned a bunch of things from that. So one of the things we learned is that, in terms of acquiring users, the cost wasn't a whole lot different than in a market like the US. But in terms of actually monetizing the users internationally, things like credit cards and a bunch of the markets that we're in don't have the kind of penetration as they do in the US. And so that was one of the reasons that we kind of led to building a service in terms of what High Five is today, and also we look to advertising to monetize.
Okay, so you're in the Valley, you're an entrepreneur. If you look at the next sort of group of entrepreneurs coming out the door, how many of them are going after this social network opportunity?
I think it's a really interesting phenomenon. With the launch of platforms, with both Open Social and the Facebook platform, I think it's interesting to see what entrepreneurs are doing today versus what they might have done something like 10 years ago. So I moved out to San Francisco in the Silicon Valley right when I graduated out of the University of Illinois. And the only choice you had was to go and start your own company, and potentially you'd have to raise capital to do that. Today, you can go and build an application. It's a much lower risk way to actually start entrepreneuring. You can do it when you're in college. It's in some sense lower risk, and we see a number of developers on the High Five platform actually making enough money to sustain themselves. So I think there's almost a more lower risk way to enter into becoming an entrepreneur and sort of grow that into something much bigger. Super.
That's why Index is setting up actual offices and dorm rooms in all the colleges in the US. Came to the same conclusion. Thanks a lot, Ramu.
Thank you.
Great. So you'll come back later.
I'll come back.
Next is Stefan von Holtzbrinck, chairman of the Holtzbrinck Group. It's great to have Stefan. He rarely agrees to this, so we're going to take advantage of interviewing him and finding out how more of a traditional media has migrated into the digital world. So, Holtzbrinck, in relative terms to Facebook and High Five, is actually, and Stardoll even, is actually fairly complex and is it's order of magnitude of business. So, could you give us a sense of what makes up the group?
Yeah, I think maybe at best in the context of community and networks, I think the company comprises, for example, nature. And what we do there is we put the scientist in the middle of a network. We make sure that it's going to be a trusted network with the editor who move around the world, and then we promote his or her work across the world. That's one example. The other example is we are in education, in higher education in the United States, and with Bedford, St. Martin's, and Worth, Freeman. And so what this is all about is to help the teachers to create their networks with their students. So what used to be a textbook publishing is going to be a network publishing. So to create the network, to help them test and assess the students, and in the end, to pass the exams. Then, for example, we also do book publishing, Picador, Pan Macmillan. In Germany, it's Rowohlt Fischer. So we published also the one who's coming next, Salman Rushdie, later on. So if you look the implication of how important the internet is to us, I don't believe that in the future any book publisher can do good business if he's not prepared for the internet. So you need to know how to create a community around your readers. For example, we are just launching with the help of Cory Doctorow. He's one of the Boing bloggers, a network on Tor.com, which is a science fiction book company that we do own, and that's going to be a global venture. And last but not least, we're in the newspaper business and with all sorts of issues around the network, and I think we're going to talk later about that in more detail. So, as you can see it, I mean, in the end, I don't think that a publisher who hasn't got the passion to create a network, I mean, it has always to be that way since many centuries. I'm just looking back at what Gordon Brown said yesterday. Yeah, if you're a 500 years institution, you don't have to worry until you come to the 500 years. So Gutenberg was just 500 years ago. So I think the publishing world is pretty much concerned, and I think it's dealing with all those issues.
Got it. So roughly, I know you're a private company, but if you could give us a sense of sort of your annual revenue and how it breaks down between press, book publishing, and online, and how that online component is growing.
Okay, all these figures are available on our website, but I'll give it for those of you who haven't had a look at it. So we have 2.5 billion is our size, and that breaks down 50-50 Germany. The other 50% are divided in 80 countries over the world. Predominantly in those 80 countries is certainly the US, which generates 40% of our international revenues. And in terms of the divisions, and we're a highly complex company, so it is, you can say it's 1/4, it's the book publishing, and half, let's say over 1/3 is educational and science publishing, 1/3 is newspaper publishing, a little bit more. And over 10% is internet revenues, pure internet revenues.
Got it. Now you have a venture arm, and that venture arm also ended up investing in a company that you guys ended up buying in the social networking space. So tell us a bit about sort of the logic behind the venture arm, and then a little more about the acquisition.
Yeah, I think venture tells about venture capitalists. It's an adventure, and I think you can't sit there and make no risks in the internet world. And so the venture up for us was the idea to play according to the rules of the internet. Since we had very good experience early on, for example, one thing is which came to us by adventure. I mean, Parship Androlla is here. We launched it out of a broken business, which was actually a job site that we didn't manage to get up and running. So, but we took that technology and we converted it into a dating site. So since this business was growing very well, and other activities as well, even during the crash in the year 2001 and 2002, we found that building those businesses is very important. But how do you do that if you are a traditional company? So we said we must radically change our views. It's also, you need an entirely different approach towards the management. You can't have the word cannibalization popping up within your organization all the time. So we formed this new unit. And we were funding them with, and in the beginning was few monies, but since we had very few dropouts, and those guys, I mean, Konstantin Urban is here, have done a really good job in monitoring almost 1,000 business plans every year. So we finally got to the point that it was worthwhile investing more and more money. So like also by chance, for example, we got into bol.com in Holland, which is the biggest Amazon-like book distributor online in Holland.
Got it. And then StudiVZ is sort of the Facebook of Germany, if you will. That was an investment. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was also. I mean, we're lucky. I mean, I think if you, there's always the saying. You should already start living afterwards, to be on the safe side. So the venture arm was very, very clever in making a very quick investment that came to our table by the Zamwa brothers. They presented it to us, and so within 5 days, and that's also the speed that you need, we closed the deal. We didn't even sign. We agreed and closed the deal to buy, I think, 15% in the beginning. And then we were watching about everything that was happening there. And I think for the most part in those areas, I mean, for Germany, we're not on the West Coast, so technological-wise to cope with all the traffic that was coming up, et cetera, huge undertaking, a huge endeavor, and those guys were doing it really well, the founders, I mean, coping with it. I mean, it's, in comparison, it's as big as German Telecom those days, t-online.com. But then, of course, sometimes the server broke down and people were hacking into the systems. And what we found out by doing this is, and monitoring it, that the activity rate the next day the system went back up again was just phenomenal. I mean, all people went online back, and as if all the flaws that the system had showed didn't matter at all. And so, since we saw this enormous activity growing, then finally we felt very well set to make the final decision when it came to the 100% was on the table, and we paid a good price for it, I think, and in the end,
from a venture standpoint or from a corporate standpoint, a good price.
From both parts. I think the venture guys are happy because they're incentivized to also. I mean, even those guys were making money on the internal transaction on the deal. That's our rule, yeah, and of course the other ones as well. Yeah, so everyone, I think, is really happy.
And how has it worked inside of Holtzbrinck? Has it continued to grow?
We have a very, I mean, the one key in the internet world is that you need creative CEOs at the top and a good technology officer, and the rest is decentralization. So our group, if you see, we have a very small holding. There are only 40 people in Stuttgart, sort of controlling or trying to cope with the size and the breadth of everything. And so we give a lot of room to develop the company from within. I think the worst we could have done is you come there and you integrate it into some kind of corporate structure and culture. I think that's going to be dead within a few weeks.
Had you done that and learned from your mistakes, or that was your instinct?
No, it was always, I mean, that's something that came from my father, my brother. I think it's always this kind of highly decentralized. I mean, we don't, for example, in the newspaper, we never did any kind of political campaigning, yeah, and in our group, the men and women at the top are the men and the women who are on stage, and that's why I don't give rarely interviews, and it's only to give applause to the team worldwide, more or less.
Got it. And so your appetite for actually getting more involved in the internet space is very significant, both in terms of what you're doing with your traditional holdings as well as looking for other opportunities.
I think quite deliberately we said some years ago, I mean it's not that long ago, in 2006, we said, I mean you see the fundamental change which I described in every one of our units. So we said we want to achieve 25% in the internet, and that, given the depression of revenues that you face compared to newspaper revenue, for example, that's quite an ambitious goal. But if you don't set it and live up to it, and if you don't provide the funds for it, you're not getting anywhere. So you have to take the risk. But I feel that if we don't end up making 25% in the next few years, we have missed out on a lot of opportunities, and also, if you look at the fundamentals of the traditional business, I think we as a group we incur some risk.
And so how do you sort of reconcile the valuations that you're paying for these highly unprofitable businesses versus sort of the strength of your traditional business? How does that happen?
I think the most important part is that you can show a certain success rate. I think if the other people in the group would feel, hey, we're paying for a lot of loss-making units, after a certain period of time they say, okay, we have to produce all the cash and they spend it otherwise. By the way, we only spend 50% of our investments in the new media, and the other 50% go back still into the traditional media. But looking, I mean, I could say that we have at least three parts within our portfolio, which would cover all the costs of all the 50 ventures that we have undertaken, each one of those, in the last 10 years.
Okay.
By divesting them. So and that shows that's the strategy, and I feel quite comfortable was right. Okay.
And with respect to StudiVZ, what is the idea? Are you going to take on Facebook in multiple countries, or you just want to focus on Germany and make it impossible for Facebook and High Five to come in?
I think for Germany, I mean, Germany is our major market, and I think Germany is first. And I think so far we're doing pretty well. I think the take-up rate in StudiVZ hasn't seen any dent in the recent months, so 25,000 people every day subscribe to the site, 10 million plus these days, and I think that's and so I think we are working on significantly improving also on the technological side, so that we have no open flank towards being taken over by someone.
So if you hold Germany as the turf for StudiVZ, you'll be very happy.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Got it. All right. Good. They understand what's coming up their way. Good. Thank you very much, Stefan.
Thank you.
Next up is William Lewis.
In fact, I'm bringing up my jacket here because it's got my most important possession in it, which is not my BlackBerry, it's my ticket for the game in Moscow tomorrow night.
Yeah.
So we can't be too long. But I must say, I was up very early with my son this morning, and he said, "Dad, you must be psyched about today." I was like, "Absolutely, I can't wait. It's my biggest ever thing. I'm flying to Moscow." He said, "Dad, are you crazy? You're going to be on YouTube for the first time." So, but I'm focused for this morning on this.
Okay, you've got clearly. Maybe is your son available? Because we like interviewing young youth.
Yeah, no, I saw that was good. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So great. Well, tell us a bit about how you came to the Telegraph Group and what you were doing prior to joining them and.
Okay, so I've been a journalist for 18 years. I worked in a couple other places like the Financial Times with Christian, who I think was here and is here today, both in the UK and in America.
We call him FT.com, by the way.
Oh, do we? Okay,
yeah.
right, okay. And I worked at a couple other newspapers at News Corporation as well, and I came to the Telegraph Group about 2.5 years ago when we began quite a radical change program to try and take a newspaper group, very traditional newspaper group, which was founded in 1855, and try and turn it into really a digitally focused organization, which tries to answer on a daily basis the following question: can you produce both our newspapers, the daily and the Sunday newspapers to the same or higher quality on a daily basis, but also at the same time confidently march into the new digital arena and display our wonderful content in all the devices and distribution mechanisms we've been hearing about this morning.
So that's a pretty, I mean, that's obviously a challenging question, right? Especially since once you go online, you're exposing yourself to a much larger international audience than what you might do in print.
Yeah.
So how's that evolved?
Well, it's been fantastic, actually. It wasn't a deliberate strategy. We set out to really focus on the UK customer, and we have about 6 million monthly unique users in the UK. But then, as we were hearing about earlier, if you devise an organizational structure where you're following the customer, you stop being a producer interest-dominated organization, and you say that if there's an earthquake in China, you don't have to wait until tomorrow morning to read it in the newspaper. We will give you our best journalists writing about it in as near real time as we can possibly. A funny thing happened, which is that we began to attract customers from around the world. And we, last month, did 18.6 million global unique users, a majority of whom were from the United States. It wasn't deliberate, but it's become a wonderful global event for us.
Is that a particular story that motivated it, or actually that's just what happens month over month?
It's just what's happened. It's happened with our political coverage. It's happened particularly with anything around the security theme, where there's obviously a thirst, particularly in the US, for people who write about events that affect the US that aren't in the US media prism, if you like. They're coming in a slightly different way. And that's been a fantastic thing for us. And the most important thing about that is not just the fact that people around the world are able to enjoy our, what we would say, wonderful content, but also they join in debates, and it's become a global community. So a fascinating thing is happening in our mind with particularly English language content, which is that it is globalizing in the same way as if you go back to various other industries, the financial services industry globalized many years ago, look where it is now. We have a feeling that the same thing is happening with English language content industry.
So you talked about community here, which obviously brings us back to the social networking theme. Yeah. So are you developing social networking capabilities within your online sites?
Yeah, so we've got something called My Telegraph, which has 20,000 registered users. It's a kind of insight into Middle Britain.
Can I just pause you for a sec? So 20,000, we've got 109, we've got 60 plus.
Sure.
Why? Why not just syndicate it out to all those different social networks?
Sure, we'll do this as a twin track, really. I mean, actually, the most important thing, we're very clear that we're good at, we have wonderful people that we employ to create world-class content, and we have a fantastic brand. The rest, we kind of realize we're not that good at, and we work with brilliant people like Facebook, like Google, like Dig, to try and get our stuff out there. We're not shy about that at all. We say, please help us bring this to the world. We have our own little event, which is for us to show that our brand isn't just a traditional media brand, it's also an enabling brand. If you want to house your stuff under our brand and that makes you feel good and you feel you want to join with other like-minded people, who are we to stop you? So it came really from the customer saying, how can we express ourselves under your brand?
But it's not really a big focus of your online push. In other words, it's more important to get the content out there than to try and sort of compete with your own social network of Telegraph readers.
Absolutely. The most important thing was to interrupt the one-dimensional workflow to ensure there was multiple points during the day where we're delivering content. That's been the first base. The second base is where we are now, is to be fully focused on distributing our stuff wherever we can get it, in any communities, just to say, we think you'll enjoy this. And we have a proven track record that people around the world will enjoy this content and benefit from it, would add value to them. The third bit is we're chipping away at creating our own little thing, which is around the enabling concepts.
And is this all as a result of sort of print advertising declining, or what's the motivation
I think the motivation was twofold. Certainly, there is an issue in the traditional print world where the death of the newspaper is much overstated. We have a wonderful newspaper product both every single day of the week, and that's going to be around in our mind forever and ever. But clearly the numbers are going down in general terms in newspapers, not going up, and that would seem to be the case for the foreseeable future. So you're driven partly by that, but let's not muck around here. There are fantastic opportunities, it's like entering a whole new, what we would call here a tuck shop. I mean, it's just a wonderful thing to finally to be able to say all this content we create can be taken to the world via these new distribution mechanisms. So it's more the excitement of it rather than the need to do it.
So, I mean, the logistics behind printing a newspaper, getting it out on the I don't even know how. I mean, I don't know what time things start.
Yeah, but it's good that you don't know that because it gives me a job.
Yeah,
so
there
that's
you
good,
go.
yeah.
No, but I mean, it must be a complete. So what happens to the logistics arm? I mean, if you could just get away from the print industry, even though it's been sort of the bread and butter, you'd do that? Or?
No, absolutely not.
Because you want to keep your job, or because economically it doesn't make sense?
I don't know, it's kind of a loaded question. Okay. I suppose the reason we do it is because we have 870,000 people a day, which equates to more than 2 million people who love and read our papers. Who am I to say, to reward your loyalty by saying we're going to take away the thing that you enjoy reading every day? Our job is just to work harder to ensure we can produce the newspapers and also march confidently into the digital world. So, you know, we say to our guys, just get on with it. The newspaper is here for, as long as the customers want the newspaper, it is here. And no way can we think about shutting it down. We wouldn't want to. They're very, very loyal customers.
So if you nail the digital side of the business, could it be, could the Daily Telegraph be a much bigger sort of online business than it is historically?
Yes, I think the growth projections that we have are that will occur.
Because of the internationalization?
Yeah, and partly because obviously in the UK, as you'll have found out from being here, people are mad for it. I mean, we are as a nation probably more up for new distribution mechanisms in a way that more any other country in the world. So there's a real core of people willing to access content on their mobile phones, Blackberries, whatever devices. So we feel very confident about that future. The issue for us is managing now this next bit of the change process. So we've redone the plumbing, if you like, when we've moved into this new house, and now we're just painting the walls and making it look really lovely. Once we've got to that stage, I think we will have got to third base.
Okay. And then when you think of competition, so, you know, there are all these sort of traditional players that are migrating the same way you are, who are either ahead of you or behind you. Are they the focal point from a competitive landscape standpoint, or where do you spend your time? Okay,
well, we spend our time, not to be trite about it, but we spend our time on the customer.
Sure.
So we are this thing is growing so fast that the idea that we wake up in the morning, as we did in the traditional newspaper business, and have a picture of the enemy on the darts board and throw a dart at it, is kind of gone. We're obsessive about the customer.
Can you tell us who that is, or no?
Well, there would have been a number of people, actually. Not you, so that would have been okay. But now we are, the mindset of the organisation is to grow it for the customer. So follow the customer. If the customer, as we heard from High Five, is in Portugal or in Denmark from Skype, go to the customer. Don't set up an office there, by the way. Do it out of London, right? Maybe put some resource there. But TV is a very good example. I mean, what's happening in our industry is that the traditional distinction between text and video is fusing, and the holy grail is to develop a content site or stream of content that merges both text and video. So we now are in the very strange, we would see without being too highfalutin about it, we would see our our main competitors being people like the BBC or CNN, where both of whom are trying to use video and text to enable the customer to him or herself decide how they find out about a story. Who am I to say you can only really know about the Chinese earthquake in words? Who are the BBC to say you can only do it in video? You have to provide both and let them choose.
Okay. Thank you very much.